earlier today you saw the slide that talked about year one, and year one we spent doing data collection and research. And so the next segment of the program includes a presentation by Jeremy Aguero, principal at Applied Analysis, which is a leading economic, fiscal, and policy research firm. And Jeremy happens to be a fourth-generation resident of Las Vegas. And it's going to be followed by a moderated discussion of some of our project champions and trusted local experts. Jeremy will be describing our challenges as they relate to the economy, our physical development pattern, and our workforce, and highlight how they interrelate. Jeremy's presentation will prime the conversation for the panel and allow us to hear from them as to why they believe this regional planning effort is an opportunity to clarify and address the key problems we face in Southern Nevada. He will also share opportunities to leverage, many based on stakeholder interviews with several of you in this room, during the first phase of the project. And with that, Jeremy, thank you.
I didn't move here for economic opportunity. I didn't move here for a job, although we know that's the single largest motivation for people moving into our community. As Stephanie alluded to, I'm a fourth generation Southern Nevada. My family moved here in 1905, actually bought land in the 1905 land auction. And it occurs to me when I think about that, I graduated from Valley High School. My father graduated from Valley High School in its first graduating class. My grandmother graduated from what was then the Las Vegas High School in 1939, and her mother graduated from what was then called the Nevada Normal School in 1917. And not that the only reason that I even bring that up is that growing up, my grandmother was my best friend. She passed away about 3 years ago. She was my best friend for any number of reasons, not the least of which is I had a paper route, and every morning I would go to her house and we would wrap papers together and watch the Pink Panther. This was a wonderful part of my upbringing. And you know, as she was getting older, she had a hard time remembering things that just happened, but she could remember our community from a long time ago. And I remember sitting there and listening to stories with her about meeting my grandfather at Mount Charleston, or being a kid sitting in schools when they used to set alarms off because the dust storms were so bad. And it occurs to me as we're sitting here and being told that we're doing some things right, but that there is work to do. The community that was hers is much different than the community that is mine. And as the father of 3 children that live in this community, I certainly hope that efforts exactly like these will provide similar opportunities, so I have the same chance of sharing some of those wonderful memories with my grandchildren in this community someday. I was asked to talk briefly about the economy overall, kind of where we are and where we're headed, highlight just a few statistics so I can turn it over to a very distinguished panel of folks that know so much more about this program and what ultimately needs to take place than I do, and who I am blessed to have learned so much from in the past few weeks as we've been preparing for this presentation. I would like to start, before I put up some slides and talk about some areas where we have challenges as well as areas where we have opportunities, I'd like to just start out by talking about some where we are today. Here we are in February of 2013. Our population is growing again. We are adding jobs again. Our incomes are rising again. Housing prices are actually going up instead of going down. I think that there's a renewed sense of optimism throughout this community in terms of where we are seeing growth take place, and in many ways the way that businesses are rethinking and residents are rethinking their investments that are here. All the time we hear about the things that we're not doing right. We hear about the challenges that confront us each and every day. But we just went over 2 million population for the very first time. We're actually adding jobs again, and perhaps even more important than that, we have led the nation in terms of the rate at which our unemployment rate is declining. Right? We're seeing investments, and it doesn't look the same way as it did before. You don't see cranes up and down the Las Vegas Strip like you did before, but there is almost $2 billion worth of investment going on within our resort corridor and downtown. And I think that has a lot to do with people believing that this community is not devoid of promise or opportunity, and that, once again, a demonstration of our resilience and resourcefulness. With that, I would like to just take a few moments and talk about some of the key statistics that we're seeing overall. Let's start, perhaps, and I think it's probably right that we start with some of the challenges that are out there. And again, my job is to do little more than to set the stage for the panel discussion that will follow. But if we think about our current challenges and we put them into some groups, let's talk about employment and the economy. Let's talk about where we are today. Right? All of the good things that we've done, all the investment that we've had, we remain among the least diversified economies of our size in the United States today. We are over-concentrated in areas like tourism. Historically, construction accounted for some 12% of our workforce, 3 times the national average. Now, some of those have subsided, and we are certainly seeing investments outside of some of those areas. But even with all of that, we are as concentrated in some of those core industries today as we have ever been. With regard to workforce development, that remains a challenge today too, and we all know it. We've all seen the statistics. Only 22.1% of our adult population has a bachelor's degree or higher. If we look at the areas that are seeing expansion and growth and investment in terms of jobs, 60% of the jobs that are in growing sectors require a bachelor's degree or higher. The fact that we have that gap, that disconnect, is a true challenge for our community. We continue today to have the lowest on-time graduation rate in the United States. We've seen some progress in that regard. Our test scores have seen some increasing, but we have a lot of work to do. Our unemployment rate, yes, has fallen more than anywhere else in the United States over the past 12 months. That said, our unemployment rate remains at 10%, much higher than we want to see it, and that's the unemployment rate that doesn't include people that are underemployed or have simply given up. If we look at that, that's sometimes referred to as the U6 unemployment rate. That currently stands at roughly 20.3%. We today have supply-demand imbalances in every sector of every one of our real estate market sectors. The housing one looks a little bit different, but certainly high rates of vacancy in other areas are problematic. If we think about it in terms of land use and our development, the pattern is certainly one that raises some questions and concerns. Our community is built to the scale of the automobile. We know it. We all live it. Getting us out of our cars has been difficult, if not impossible. We have among the highest population densities in terms of how we're developing, yet at the same time, we have a higher than average automobile dependence. Population growth continues to expand, and if we look at population, we're seeing folks moving in, retirees, families are continuing to grow at relatively high levels, and we're actually seeing that growth at both ends of the spectrum. Somewhat surprisingly, the 2 fastest growing segments of our population, people over the age of 65 and people under the age of 18, which is sort of ironic because people over the age of 65 don't really like people under the age of 18, right? It's our own little problem that we're going to be dealing with, but it's interesting. That's what makes us unique. It's also what makes us great, not that it doesn't come with challenges. And there are costs associated with our development patterns. We've seen instability. It is amazing. 10 years ago, the only thing we talked about was housing affordability. How are we going to build enough houses to essentially house all of the workers we were going to have? And now housing affordability is almost everywhere for most of us, right? And yet now we're almost seeing that cycle start again. Only recently we started hearing those questions again about true affordable workforce housing, and can it exist? How do we balance those things? The cost of growth, we hear it all the time. It's become a recurring theme that we hear come in and out. Does growth pay for growth? Can it pay for growth? How are we going to be sustainable as a community over time? There is certainly this disconnect between whether we're sustainable from a construction standpoint, whether we're as opposed to the people who live or occupy those houses or office buildings or industrial centers. I would also point to our socioeconomic profile. Today in Southern Nevada, 1 in every 3 households earns less than $35,000 a year. 1 in every 3. And we're a community of 2 million people. It's the same 500 folks you see almost everywhere you go, right? And what we start to remember is that we are a community that maybe doesn't, that has a great deal of diversity, both socioeconomic and otherwise. Today, 57% of K through 12 students qualify for free or reduced lunch. 1 in 9 people living in our community qualifies and currently takes advantage of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. You know it by its legacy name, food stamps. The region, we spend 66% of our income on housing and transportation. That is arguably way too much, particularly when communities that are growing and thriving and doing many of the things that we've talked about are spending much less. Our community is also very highly segmented. The conclusion I think is, oops, I think I went, I apologize. I think the conclusion is relatively straightforward from the standpoint that if we think about it, the opportunities require strategies that address our socioeconomic infrastructure. They require us to think different about our physical landscape, about our human capital, our physical capital. It requires that we think differently than we do today. I don't want to leave you with the impression that it's all about the challenges. There are also huge numbers of opportunities that we have a real chance to take advantage of, to utilize, and to expand on. I think one of the ones that we've talked about a great deal is specifically around health care. We need to think long and hard about right-sizing this sector. We rank among the nation's lowest in terms of doctors per capita. We rank among the lowest in terms of nurses per capita. That is hugely problematic for us, and while we have seen some recent growth, particularly in specialty centers, we certainly know that there is a great divide between the health care that is both in terms of access, quality, and cost between different sectors of our economy. I think there are also physical attributes to our community that are extremely important overall. We think about our climate, and we get criticized sometimes for talking about people moving here because they don't want to shovel snow. Just ask the people in New England today whether they would like to live somewhere else, right? But it's also important in terms of proximity. We have incredible competitive advantages, whether it's the sun that we have or the distances that we are from places like Phoenix and Southern California. These are important to us overall. In addition to that, we also have a huge number of outdoor activities. These have the potential to create a healthy lifestyle if we only had greater access to them. And I don't think any discussion about opportunities that we have to leverage would be complete without having some discussion of the tourism industry. Arguably the greatest single asset that we have, employing more people, paying more in wages and salaries, and attracting nearly 40 million visitors to our community who pay a great number of taxes and buy a number of things each and every year. If we think about strategic positioning, right, alignment with those population centers, the ability to move goods in and out, how strategic can our community be? How do we leverage what we have? How do we grow into the future to take advantage of everything, all of it, whether it's the technology hubs that we have, our proximity, or the infrastructure? What do we need to do to come together as a community to take advantage of that? We have a remarkably pro-business stance here. Whether you want to think about that in terms of entrepreneurial freedom, whether you want to think about it in terms of the benefits and drawbacks to having among the lowest tax structures, most pro-business tax structures in the United States, or whether you want to think about it in terms of the regional collaboration that we've had relative to water and infrastructure, transportation, flood control. We try to think like businesses most of the time, and that's created some advantages. We probably need to do it a bit more. So what is the conclusion? What's the conclusion? Nevada has significant potential. I don't think any of us would doubt that. But perhaps, like my grandmother thinking about how my world was maybe a little bit different than hers, what our potential is today perhaps looks a little different than it did before. Perhaps the solutions that we had previously aren't the solutions that we're going to have going into the future. We need to be able to capitalize on all of these opportunities, and in doing that, we're going to have to look at things differently. And I would suggest that the answer to that, what is the next step, is to address common problems through regional collaboration. And I would certainly argue that if there's anything that this day and this project and hopefully this panel is about, it is about that word regional collaboration. So with that, let me stop my brief overview and take the time to introduce some of the panel members that are here. Again, I have learned so much from them. I think we all we all kind of believe that we understand what's going on in this community. We understand all the intersections between everything that happens until you really sit down and talk to some folks and learn that sometimes two heads are much better than one. To my immediate left is Rob Lang, the chair of the Environment Task Group. Rob, of course, known to, I'm sure, everyone who's here, has fast become a trusted champion and advocate for principles of sound planning and economic development in his role at Brookings Mountain West. He has performed critical economic analyses that will also guide the Economic Development Task Group. Please help me in welcoming Rob. Shawn Gerstenberger leads up the Healthy Communities Task Group. Under his leadership, that group will tackle the role the built environment plays in influencing behaviors that can improve our health outcomes for people across demographic spectrum and certainly of all incomes. We are so lucky to have Shawn here. Thank you very much for being here, Shawn. Erin Breen leads up the Transportation Task Group, and I would argue one that is as important as any, to be sure. Her role will lead discussion on design, access, and need to additional services and infrastructure to reverse the impacts of sprawl and redefine how we invest in transit. Thank you so much for being here. Sam Cherry, the chair of the Housing Task Group, was selected to lead that group, recognizing his commitment to downtown revitalization and to providing the lifestyle that we know people of all incomes and all ranges want, right? Thinking about the fact that we are an incredibly diverse community that requires incredibly diverse housing. To live in places where you can walk between work and home, the amenities, and get your daily needs, at least within, as some people have called it in my world, my own bubble, right? I get to do that. So again, Sam, thanks for being here. Please welcome Sam. Next is Cass Palmer. He chairs the Public Engagement and Equity Task Group, the advisory group on public engagement efforts for the project. Under Cass's guidance, the project will ensure its emphasis on outreach within marginalized populations. Let me put it differently. He will make sure that everybody's included and that we're thinking equitably about this entire process. Cass, thank you so much for being here. And last, but certainly not least, Louise Helton. What a remarkable asset to our community. And I've told her that before. I certainly don't mean to embarrass her. But representing the consortium committee, the advisory group to the SNRPC on this specific project, she is well-known local leader and has close to 30 years in the Valley, working collaboratively on education, and is now at the very forefront of the renewable energy industry. Thank you so much for being here. So without any further ado, let's jump into the questions and get some of our panelists to give us some of this information. You know, Rob, I'd like to start with you. Across the country, the Sustainable Communities Initiative grantees are working, and we want to work on integrating everything from housing to land use to economic development to transportation to build communities, to work together to be more collaborative, more prosperous, more equitable, more sustainable. We use all of these words. The Southern Nevada Strong process will focus on the built environment as an innovative approach to addressing these and probably countless other issues. What would you emphasize in terms of how place-based strategies might address, I guess, some of the things that I put up on the slides.
Sure, thanks for the question. Just for, because you mentioned how long you've lived here, I've lived here less time. I moved here 3 years ago. Watching the Weather Channel this morning, I felt pretty good about the move. It was raining where I used to live, Alexandria, Virginia, but it was going to snow where I'm from, New York. So, you know, as a whole, things worked out for me. I picked this city. I came, and there was a job here that I took, but I didn't have to come for that job. In other words, some corporation didn't relocate me to this region. I came because I saw opportunity. I saw challenges, but I saw more opportunities. Also, notably, I'm a specialist in Sunbelt cities. And this is an important Sunbelt city. And I want to be in this city when we start to do things like some of the other peer places that I see around the region that are part of my charge as Brookings Mountain West. Now, most of my travel these days is either back to Washington, where I go next week, or it's to Phoenix, Denver, Salt Lake, some Los Angeles. And what I notice, and I can tell this from my emails, is that Hertz doesn't like me anymore, because I used to rent a lot of cars. So, you know, you get these kind of like, have we done something wrong? You used to rent a ton of cars. No, you don't rent from us anymore. And the interesting thing is that when I look at the list of cities I'm going to, I'm taking transit in all of them. And the most fascinating one, because I was there when this whole discussion was occurring in 2006, I did 6 months as a visiting faculty member at Arizona State University. And that was a critical time with the rail under construction, with the downtown redevelopment project. And what I see in Salt Lake and Denver and Phoenix is that all of them have light rail, all of them have access to the airport or are under construction for access to the airport in light rail. And so the majority of trips I take out of Las Vegas are now to regions where I see placemaking. And I see the economic advantages of placemaking, which I'll get to in just a second. But, you know, to see the difference, too, from our region is important. Because if I did not live in Las Vegas, if the Brookings Mountain West Center were in Phoenix, say, where there's now a hotel that loves me because I always stay there because it's next to the light rail, so it balances Hertz. But if I were coming back to this city, I would need a car. And I will not move from here, go anywhere else until I don't need a car in this city. That's my charge. I've determined that. And I you know, that may be forever. Or it may be sooner, but I'll probably stay anyway because I still look at those winters back east. And what I see in Phoenix, when I was there in '06, in that critical moment, and I saw some of the discussion around light rail, is that there was a firm that's now right at a light rail stop next to the multifamily housing development I lived in. I lived at Trillium at Rio Salado, if anyone knows that little development, right along Washington. First Solar was constructing a corporate headquarters across the street. And the First Solar management said to Phoenix, look, if you want to be serious about green technology, and Phoenix wants to be what Texas is to carbon-based energy, Arizona wants to be, to the next generation of energy. It's a great project. It's a great idea for the region, and they're putting big investment into ASU that way. And they were attracting these firms. And First Solar said, listen, the folks who are going to work for us, they don't want 2 cars in a subdivision. They want a place. They want places like Tempe. They want the downtown corridor out of Central Ave. You need to put this infrastructure in place if we're to be credible with that workforce. We can't really move here unless you have this asset, because unless you have this asset and you are building housing and mixed-use projects around that asset, we really don't actually have the physical space that we can use as the basis to say one of these footloose workers who could work anywhere, come to our city. And so in Phoenix, there was an explicit recognition directly as to the specific value, again, of that infrastructure, not just for transportation, not even just for the real estate investment that's possible at the station stops, and that's significant, but that somebody would seek the region out as an option and work in industry there because they saw a different kind of a space that they'd see in Phoenix in 1990 or 2000. And it's emerging, and so I go to Phoenix now, and they even have the airport connector. And I stay in this one DoubleTree that's between downtown and Tempe, where I do most of my business. And in when this facility was built, when this DoubleTree was built there at 44th Street, it was the typical suburban, dorky, office parky, phase 3 of whatever development it was supposed to be in, from some, species that was displaced in the process, some rare species of cactus that was lost as they built this thing. Now, the interesting thing is, they're doing all these conferences. Somebody said to me the other day, I was there as recently as Martin Luther King Day. And they said, we're getting a whole different clientele. People aren't coming by car. They're rolling up their bags from this station stop. That's how different the space making has made people's access and use of Phoenix. And I'll end on this remark. One of my first interests in Las Vegas came in the early 1990s when I read an article in Harper's Magazine about the master plan community development that was occurring in what is now the northern part of Green Valley. And this article really piqued my interest. It was an area of specialty I was in. I'm interested in that form of governance. I'm interested in that form of development. And it was, by the way, a super critical article. Now that I know the Greenspuns and everything, they were really made out to be these sort of villainous folks. How dare they build Green Valley? How dare they try this new form of, master plan community development? And I remember coming out in 1993, 2 years after I read the article, and it was the sexiest place on earth. It was like the newest subdivision. 20 years later, this year, it's a distressed neighborhood. The rapid downward filtering of place in Las Vegas is stunning. Old places are 20 years old. Everything now is past the 215 south into the old land that maybe we didn't have to use if we'd built a different Las Vegas. That was the old BLM land. And what's really interesting is that the tools to fix Green Valley, and downtown development is important, but the real place where we're going to either make place or not make place, to play on that word, is in these older, day before yesterday completed built-out subdivisions around this region. And you see them in Phoenix too, in South Scottsdale. And we had an option at one point to develop a light rail system proximate to all of this neighborhood distress. And for reasons we need not go into, because I think we should just positively look at examples like that and move forward. And I think we should, lessons learned, reload, try again, Took a lot of other cities a lot of shots to get this right. It took them a lot of effort to get their light rail systems in place. But there is a right-of-way that runs right through this neighborhood. That is the old line that ran out to the magnesium plant. Perfectly aligned. It would stop at all major intersections. You would see the equivalent of the district, which is mixed use but auto-dependent, placed along a series of light rail stops. And it would have anchored a general redevelopment and reinvestment in that space in the exact subdivision space that we had lost. And I see this opportunity in this project to create the frame for the region to understand why this is important. We didn't do a good job explaining it the last time. We didn't have enough time to explain it the last time. What we can do in this case now is say, it's not just downtown. Downtown's great. Things are going to work out well in downtown. We all know that. It's the northern parts of Green Valley. It's all of those spaces in this region and the comparable regions around the west that I see that are really going to decide whether or not we create this livable space in these metropolitan areas. And so it's actually for that kind of space that I'm in this effort, and happily in this effort, because I think that when we're done with this process, that all of this information, all of this network, all of this goodwill, that's going to be the difference. This is what we're going to get out of something like this. And the federal government is going to recognize it, and we're going to be in a position to make a request for the kinds of resources we haven't been getting from the federal government. We're 51 out of 51 on formula-based aid to the states, in part because we've never made asks in a way that look like we're building something. With that, I thank you.
So, Shawn, maybe the right thing to do now is to turn to you a little bit. I mean, Dr. Lang imagines a community that is more livable. We're more sexy, less dorky, definitely what we want to be, right, as a community. But, maybe we transition it for a moment over to the idea of how this relates to health, right? What are the health outcomes associated with the vision that was just sort of presented so eloquently by Dr. Lang?
Well, sure, thank you. First of all, I'm thrilled that we're even considering health as part of a master plan, because typically we get left out, and we think of it as an afterthought. And so to have it up front and have it as one of the kind of key pieces of the planning initiative, I think is exciting and the right thing to do. So there's my plug for public health, your personal message for the day. But when we look at the built environment and health and how they're connected, there's a wealth of evidence in the scientific literature that says how we construct and build and interact with our environment can be conducive to health. And we often think that that means we have to get out and run 17 miles a day on a jogging track, but that's not the case. And so simple things that we can do to modify our environment to get people to move. We know that a lot of these health indicators can be related to just simply moving. And so obesity, overweight, some of the biggest epidemics we face in health right now in our nation are at the forefront of that and can be enhanced or at least reduced by modifying our environment. Diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And so a lot of the evidence shows that simply by getting out and walking on a regular basis, we can improve the metrics for these outcomes. And so physical activity is one of the most modifiable risk factors that we have for preventing many of the chronic diseases that we deal with that put huge burdens on our healthcare systems and that we have to deal with in many, many years down the road. So one of the things that the health piece has to do, and it has a daunting task, I think it has to integrate a little bit of everyone else's groups. Health involves planning for housing that's safe and affordable and located in the right place. It involves energy and energy efficiencies. It involves making sure we include underserved populations. Transportation, environment are all key pieces of constructing the built environment that's conducive to health, and you'll hear a little bit more about each of these. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can move people around, and I think that's extremely important, but I also think we need to drastically consider is how we get people to move. And so that's the other piece that I would like to infuse here. And when we build these environments and we construct these areas, I think it's important for us to think about active transport, which isn't exercise, but it's movement with a purpose. How can I walk to work? Can I go to the grocery store on a bicycle? Can I have an easy access to a mass transit system that can take me to one of these places to get a flu shot or to buy fresh vegetables? Okay, and this is how we need to think about health as an integral piece of how all these partnerships are going to fit together. And so I think that's key. A lot of this evidence, again, based on the literature, shows that these need to be connected, and so that our trails need to go places that people want to go. So making sure that our community, the people that use these areas and transit systems and paths and trails, are actually going to a place they want to go, not where we think it's convenient to site them because we already own the land. And so these are things that we have to seriously consider. And with that, the economic development piece comes in. When we have these high-density areas like Dr. Lang discussed, and we have them living in these urban environments, can we then attract businesses that sell fresh foods or give flu shots or have other things that are conducive to health that can integrate with those areas? And I think that's where it gets exciting. And so I agree that we need to have an environment that is not built around moving cars, but perhaps moving people and moving them to correct places and places that are more easily accessible for health. We have to make it difficult for someone to drive their child to school, okay, and easy for them to walk. And it's easier to get on a bicycle than to turn the key and go somewhere. And we have some significant issues with that in this town with some of our gated communities and access where you can see something 50 feet away. You can't walk there, but you can drive there in 10 minutes if you go all the way around the block. And so these are things we have to deal with. And in doing this, there's a lot of other groups that are going to benefit. And so by reducing the amount of vehicle time and travel time, we're going to reduce our emissions, which is better air quality, which we know is related to things like asthma and COPD and other respiratory illnesses. We're going to reduce our demand on energy, which I'm sure Louise will mention later. And one of the most staggering quotes that we use in public health is that there's a lot of data out there that shows for the first time in the history of our nation, our children's life expectancy is shorter than ours. Isn't that amazing? That's unacceptable. Okay? And we need to figure out ways to modify our environment to make it more conducive to health. And I think this grant opportunity and this planning strategy is the perfect place for that to start.
Sam, I guess I'm sort of interested in the whole idea behind changing of places, right? And when I think about our community and I think about transformation, and we were talking about it a little bit before we came up here, it seems like downtown is an excellent example of the way that our community is evolving over time. Maybe even, getting us closer to the vision that Dr. Lang laid out, and certainly providing more of the opportunities to be a more active participant that Shawn laid out. I guess the question that I want to ask you, though, is when we think about trends nationally, particularly as they relate to places that people want to live. What's kind of going on the national landscape, and how do we translate some of those national trends to what's kind of playing out locally?
There's definitely a national trend, and there's been for some time, for urban living. And it's really starting to change where people want efficiency. People are willing to live in smaller units. They want less of a power bill. They're mindful of how far the transit system is from them. In other communities, it's a selling point, and customers ask a realtor, where is the transit line? How fast is it to get to work? It's something that we're just starting to get here in Las Vegas. I feel like I'm a product of it. I woke up this morning, I went downstairs, I grabbed an apple from the store, and I walked here. And guess what? My feet hurt. But it's happening here. It's really, it's just beginning here. It looks like a bright future for downtown, and like Rob mentioned, there's definitely concerns beyond downtown that ring around downtown that pushes out towards the mountains. That's I don't want to say it's forgotten, but we're just remembering downtown now. So people are accepting smaller units. They're realizing they don't need big spaces anymore. They realize efficiency is a very important thing. And I hope our group, we're going to ask every question we can ask on what's a better way to live, and how does that integrate with transportation, with healthcare, with education, and hopefully push the envelope for developers to recognize that these are things that have to happen in their developments for a sustainable community. So, thank you.
Let me just ask you a question as a follow-up. When we think about the places, and we think about building places that